All right, the fire in the forge is roaring. Your words are the steel, and I will shape them into a legendary blade. Listen closely, because this is no longer a story being retold. This is a world being reborn. Before we pierce the veil of time, let us pause for a moment. I want you to know that the story you are about to hear will change how you see judgment, how you see compassion, and the very nature of hope itself. There is a twist coming that no one could ever predict. So right now, tell me, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it on your clock? Leave a comment, a small mark of your presence in this moment, before we venture together into the primordial realm. You have been told the story of the angels who fell because of lust. They painted you a picture of powerful celestial guards who, in their desire for mortal women, betrayed their divine mandate and earned eternal punishment. It is a simple story, a clear-cut lesson about sin and retribution. But what if I told you that was a lie? Not a malicious lie, but one crafted to conceal a truth far more complex and agonizing. A truth more terrifying, yet filled with far more hope. The truth is, they did not fall because of lust. They fell because of a promise. They were not punished by hatred. They were judged by a love that had been broken. And the most devastating judgment the universe has ever recorded was, in fact, an act of the most profound compassion imaginable. Join me and let us return to the dawn of all things. In that time, the universe was young and silent. There was no radiant heaven or shadowy hell. Only two realms existed in parallel, like a shape and its shadow, like a breath and the stillness that follows. On one side was the source, an infinite well of pure creative energy, an ocean of light from which all life originated and all laws were born. It was the beating heart of the universe, warm, brilliant, and full of power. And on the other side, separated by an invisible veil of mist, were the Grey Lands. This was not a place of evil, it was a place of forgetting. A barren wasteland, a patch of existence left behind when the cosmos was shaped, where the ground was cracked like an ancient face and the air was thick with a silent sorrow. The dust here was not sand, but the ashes of dreams that never took form. The wind here carried no cool breeze, but the whisper of despair. Guarding the fragile balance between these two realms were the Guardians. They were not angels with pristine white wings. Imagine them as beings woven from the very light of the source, powerful streams of consciousness in humanoid form, but with the energy of stars flowing through their veins. Their sacred duty was simple: to watch over the source, to ensure its purity was never defiled, and to guarantee the order of the universe was never broken. Their leader, the supreme commander of these celestial sentinels, was Zoriel. Zoriel was more than a warrior. He was the living embodiment of order. Every step he took was a law, every word he spoke a truth. His eyes held the coldness of distant stars and the precision of a perfect mathematical equation. He was the guardian of order, wielding the power of absolute justice. But hidden deep beneath that flawless exterior, at the core of his consciousness, was something he himself rarely acknowledged: a buried compassion, an empathy for all the things he was tasked to govern. In the other realm, in the silence of the Grey Lands, lived the Grey Tribe. They were not the descendants of sin. They were the forgotten children of creation, the first humans to be born, but fated to a land devoid of a single drop of energy from the source. Their lives were a long, slow process of fading away. The earth could not be farmed. The water was scarce and bitter. Children were born frail, and the elderly passed on in silence, their clouded eyes gazing toward the misty veil, where they could sense a warmth they could never touch. They were dying, not from a plague, but from a lack of hope. And rising from that despair was a woman. Her name was Lyra. Lyra was not a queen or a warrior. She was a mother, a sister, a daughter. In her eyes there was no cunning, only a will of iron forged through generations of suffering. Her hair was the color of the ashen dust of the Greylands, and her hands were calloused from trying to till the dead earth. She was willing to do anything, to pay any price, not for herself, but to save her withering people. And every night she would kneel, not to pray to any god, but to send her whispers through the mist, a plea directed at the shining figures she could only vaguely sense. Day after day, the Guardians stood watch on the shore of the source, feeling those whispers like faint ripples on a perfectly still lake. Most of them ignored it, for the law was clear: no interference. The Greylands were a part of the order. Absence was its own form of balance. But there was one who could not ignore it. His name was Kael, a young guardian whose heart of light burned with idealism and empathy. He had not yet endured the erosion of millennia spent enforcing the law. In his consciousness, order without compassion was just a perfect prison. Every day, Kael stood at the boundary, gazing into the Greylands. He did not just see a wasteland, he saw Lyra's face, gaunt but unbroken. He heard the soundless cries of children, as faint as a passing breeze. He felt the slow, certain approach of death, like a tide of dust and ash. And Lyra's prayer to him was not an annoyance. It was the most mournful cry for help he had ever heard, a hymn of life desperate to exist. A question began to sprout in Kael's mind, a dangerous question, the seed of rebellion. Was an order that allowed such suffering truly a righteous one? Then one night, as the two moons of the Greylands hung in the sky like two glass tears, Lyra's whisper became clearer than ever before. She was no longer begging, she was proposing. Kael felt her thought cut through the mist, as sharp and desperate as a shard of glass. He decided to do the unthinkable. He answered. He focused his consciousness, creating a fragile bridge between the two worlds. "What do you want, daughter of Ash?" Kael's voice echoed in Lyra's mind, not as sound, but as a sudden wave of warmth. Lyra was not afraid. She had waited for this moment her entire life. "We do not want riches, we do not want power, we ask only for life," she said, her mind painting images of her fading children, of the barren fields. "We feel your strength, the warmth of the source. Share with us but a single drop to rekindle the dying embers in our veins." Kael was silent. He knew what she was asking. It was the ultimate taboo. The energy of the source was absolute, not to be mixed, not to be shared. Sensing his hesitation, Lyra made her final offer, an offer that would change the fate of worlds. "This is not a plea," she said, her voice now firm and resolute. "This is a covenant. Give us life, and we, the Grey Tribe, will serve you for eternity. We will be your servants, the guardians of your boundary from this side. All that we have, all that we are, will be yours." A forbidden covenant. A mad, unprecedented idea. But in Lyra's desperation, Kael saw a brutal logic. And deep within him, a feeling he had never known was rising. An admiration, a resonance with this woman's indomitable will. A quiet, fledgling love, naive but powerful, began to take root. And for that love, for that pity, and for the arrogance of youth that believed it could fix a flaw in creation, Kael made his decision. "Wait," he said, and severed the connection. He returned to his fellow guardians, his heart of light thrumming with a new purpose. He did not tell them of his love. He told them of justice. He told them of an imbalance in the very fabric of creation. He painted a vision of a grateful people, a loyal army that would protect their border. He appealed to the pity of some and the pride of others. He convinced them they were not breaking the law, but perfecting it, that they could be saviors, not just sentinels. And he succeeded. A small group of guardians, weary of eternal monotony, yearning for a greater purpose, agreed with him. Together they would break the most ancient of vows. They did not do this for carnal lust. They did this for a misguided ideal, a compassion that had been led astray by pride. That night, the sky above the Greylands was no longer silent. A crack of light appeared in the mist. Kyle and his fellow guardians stepped across the boundary for the first time in history, setting foot upon the land of ash. They carried with them small flasks, shimmering with the pure energy of the source. Lyra and her people knelt on the ground, looking up at the visitors from another world with awe and hope. There was no seduction, no deceit, only two desperate parties making an impossible pact. The guardians opened their flasks. The golden light of the source poured out, not like water, but like liquid honey, seeping into the parched earth. Instantly, a miracle occurred. The cracked ground sealed itself. From the fissures, sprouts shot upwards at an unnatural speed. In minutes, the gray lands were covered in a carpet of vegetation, but something was wrong. The flowers that bloomed were too vibrant, their colors sickly and garish. The tree trunks twisted into bizarre shapes. The air filled with a scent so sweet, it was nauseating. It was a new dawn, a blood-red dawn, where life was bought with purity. The gray tribe felt the energy flow into their bodies. Their sallow skin turned rosy, their muscles filled with strength. For the first time, they felt healthy. They cheered, praising the guardians as gods. But Lyra, who had started it all, felt a chill run down her spine. She looked into the eyes of her people. The warmth, the resilience that was once there had vanished. In its place was a cold light, a bottomless hunger. They had been saved, but they had lost a part of their humanity. She looked at her own hands, no longer calloused but smooth and powerful, and she realized a terrifying truth. She had traded the soul of her people for the life of their flesh. And then the true consequence of the forbidden covenant began to manifest. The women of the Gray tribe began to conceive. The children were born not in 9 months, but in mere weeks. They were not hideous giants. They were far more terrifying. They were the unfulfilled. Imagine children of such perfect beauty, it was unreal. Their skin was as smooth as porcelain, their eyes as clear as crystal, but utterly empty. They did not cry, they did not laugh. They simply existed like beautiful, soulless dolls. They were the physical embodiment of a forbidden covenant, a fusion of light and ash that created a vacuum. And they were hungry. Theirs was not a hunger for food. They hungered for life energy. Wherever one of the unfulfilled walked, the garish flowers would instantly wilt. If such a child touched a small animal, it would fall over, dead without a single wound. They passively drained the life from everything around them without malice, simply to exist. The Gray tribe, in their initial joy, did not realize this. They loved their beautiful children, unaware that those same children were slowly siphoning the life from them and from their new world. Meanwhile, in the other realm, a terrible change was underway. The great source began to fluctuate. Its golden light started to dim, laced with gray, smoke-like streaks. The loss of energy, even just a few drops, had created an imbalance. The heart of the universe was beginning to beat out of rhythm. The fragile equilibrium of the worlds was on the verge of total collapse. This fluctuation, this arrhythmia in the symphony of the universe, was like an alarm bell ringing in the consciousness of Zoriel. He sat in meditation at the very center of the source, and for the first time in millennia, his absolute peace was shattered. It was not an angry sound, it was a wrong note, an unbearable dissonance in a perfect piece of music. It was the feeling of a crack spreading across flawless glass. He opened his eyes, and those star-like eyes saw through all barriers, pierced the mist, and witnessed everything. He saw the guardians living among the Gray tribe like kings. He saw the Gray lands blooming in a diseased fashion. He saw the beautiful, empty, unfulfilled walking about, leaving a trail of decay in their wake. And he saw the source being slowly defiled. A command formed in Zoriel's consciousness, not from a higher entity, but from his very nature, from his role as the protector of order. The command was not punish. The command was re-establish balance. Zoriel rose. The light around him condensed, forming a suit of shimmering armor and a sword made not of metal, but of solid light. He did not summon an army. He was an army. He moved not with anger, but with an infinite sadness. The sadness of a gardener who must cut away a beautiful but diseased branch to save the entire tree. The sky above the gray lands tore open, not with thunder and fire, but with a sudden, profound silence. All sound ceased. All movement stopped. An invisible pressure weighed down on everything. And then Zoriel descended. He did not land on the ground. He hovered in the air, a figure of terrible brilliance, his mere presence causing the grotesque flowers to wither and the ground to tremble. The rebellious guardians looked up, and for the first time they felt fear. Their pride evaporated like mist before the sun. They realized they were not saviors. They were children who had made a terrible mistake. Kale was the first to act. He flew up to face Zoriel, not to fight, but to plead. "Zoriel, please stop. They are innocent. The fault is mine." Zoriel looked at Kale, and in his eyes there was no contempt, only disappointment. Innocence ended the moment the forbidden covenant was made. You did not bring them life, Kale. You brought them a different version of death. At that moment, the Unfulfilled, sensing the abundant and pure life energy radiating from Zoriel, acted on instinct. Hundreds of angelically beautiful children turned toward him in unison, their empty eyes for the first time showing a flicker of light. Hunger. They took to the air, a swarm of flesh and blood locusts, rushing toward Zoriel to drain his light. The confrontation was at hand. This was the climax, where the fate of a world would be decided. Zoriel did not move. He simply existed. As the first of the Unfulfilled touched the energy field surrounding him, they let out a silent scream, a scream felt only in the mind, and disintegrated into glowing ash. The others, feeling no fear because they were incapable of it, continued to charge and met the same fate. In seconds, the army of the Children of the Covenant was erased. Zoriel descended to the ground, walking upon the glittering dust that remained. He walked past a stunned Kale, past the trembling guardians, and stopped before Lyra. Lyra stood her ground. She looked Zoriel directly in the eyes. She was ready. She knew she had failed. She knew the price of her mistake. Her people stood behind her, silent, awaiting the final judgment. Zoriel raised his sword of light. The blade blazed, illuminating all of the gray lands, promising a cleansing by fire. Everyone, including Kale, believed he would wipe them from existence, erasing this mistake forever. Time seemed to stop. The moment of judgment was here. The sword swung down with terrifying speed. But then, something no one expected happened. A twist that would be whispered throughout the galaxies for eternity. Zoriel's sword did not strike Lyra. It did not strike anyone. In a flash of light, it cut through the air at something invisible that existed between the Guardians and the Grey Tribe. It cut the Forbidden Covenant itself. A scream echoed, not from any throat, but from the very fabric of reality. It was the shriek of a broken vow, of an unholy bond being severed. An invisible shockwave spread outwards. The Grey Tribe collapsed to the ground, but not in pain. They felt the borrowed power pouring out of their bodies like water through their fingers. The grotesque flowers around them withered in an instant, turning to dust and returning the gray lands to their native barrenness. But as the power left, something else returned. Lyra looked at those around her, and in their eyes, she saw fear, confusion, but most importantly, she saw their humanity again. The warmth had returned. The remaining Unfulfilled, now deprived of the energy source that sustained their false existence, dissolved into millions of specks of light. rising to the sky like a cloud of fireflies and vanishing into the air. Zoriel's judgment was not destruction, it was surgery. He did not kill the patient. He removed the tumor. He lowered his sword. He looked at Lyra and her people, now weak, exposed, and trembling on the ground, but pure. They were themselves again, the forgotten children of Ash, but no longer tainted by a power that was not theirs. He looked deep into Lyra's eyes and saw no defiance or hatred. He saw immense regret and a boundless love for her people, the very love that had pushed her to the brink of annihilation. And in that moment, the deep, buried compassion within the Guardian of Order rose to the surface. Zoriel turned and walked to the center of the barren Greylands. He spoke no word. He raised his sword one more time, but not to strike. He plunged it straight into the dry, cracked earth. And a second miracle, a true miracle, occurred. From where the sword of light was embedded, a stream of clear water began to flow. Not a mighty river, not a cleansing flood, but a small, humble spring, pure and real. It filled a crack in the earth, forming a small pool that reflected the gray sky. Zoriel stood there, watching the water, and then something even more wondrous happened. A single tear, glittering like a liquid diamond, traced a path down the perfect face of the Guardian of Order and fell. His tear merged with the spring water, carrying with it not power, but a promise. The promise of a future that could be cultivated anew with their own sweat and tears. A new beginning, not gifted, but given the chance to be earned. The legacy of that day was written not in fire, but in water. The rebellious guardians were taken back to the source by Zoriel to face their own judgment. They were bound in temporal loops, forced to witness their mistake over and over until they understood the true nature of order. But Kael, the one who started it all, received a different sentence, one that was both a punishment and a grace. He was stripped of most of his power and bound to remain in the Greylands. His new duty, to protect the spring Zoriel had left behind, and to use what little light he had left to help the Grey tribe learn to cultivate and survive. It was his long path to redemption. As for Lyra and her people, they had lost their divine power, their easy life. They faced a difficult future, having to relearn how to live on the barren land. But they had found something far more precious: hope. They had water, they had a chance, and most importantly, they had themselves back. They gathered around the small spring, not to worship, but to begin the work. They had learned a profound lesson. True strength comes not from taking or borrowing, but from resilience, from cultivating life with one's own hands, even if one must start from a land of ash. This story, the story of the legacy of the Source, does not teach us about sin and punishment. It teaches us that judgment and compassion are not always opposites. Sometimes compassion is the highest form of justice. Judgment is not always destruction. Sometimes it is the chance to begin again. Zoriel, the Guardian of Order, could have annihilated them all to blindly preserve the law, but he did not. He chose a third path, a path not written in any cosmic law book, the path of redemption. He taught both worlds that the greatest order is not stasis, but the ability to heal and to grow. And that legacy echoes to this day. It reminds us that in every crisis, in every moment of despair, there is always a choice. The choice between rigid adherence to the law and the search for a more humane solution. The choice between destroying what is wrong and trying to heal it. Now I want to ask you a question not for the mind, but for the heart. Was Zoriel's action to you a cold judgment or a profound compassion? And Lyra's forbidden covenant, born from love and utter desperation, was it truly, absolutely condemnable? Each of us in this life finds ourselves at times in our own Greylands, facing barrenness and despair, searching for a source of hope. If this story of a sword that gave birth to life has touched your soul, please share it, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you held the power to judge, would you choose the law or would you choose compassion? And if you wish to continue this journey to uncover more forgotten truths, more stories buried by time, then do not hesitate. Hit the subscribe button for our channel, because here we do not just retell history, we rekindle the embers of the past, and together we search for the springs of hope in even the most desolate of wastelands.